Most incidents with radioactive materials are not as dramatic as this, but smaller, more common incidents can also pose a hazard. The fact that they are small and could go unnoticed can make them even more of a threat. First of all, there are the health risks to you and everyone who works with you. Second, your laboratory is licensed. Any incident brought to the attention of the authorities may result in a heavy fine and the possibility of the license being withdrawn. If that happened, it's an end to your work and the work of your colleagues. Would you want to be responsible for that? Then there's your research. Contamination creeping into your experiments will almost certainly jeopardize your results.
I really don't know what's going on here, Fred. These results are very suspect. The counts don't match up.
It could be months of work. Contamination control is something you have to take seriously. Let's look at the various things you need to be aware of if you're not going to be a threat to yourself and to everyone around you. Contamination control starts with good design of fixtures and fittings, and you should be wary of working with radionuclides in areas not designed for the purpose. It's important you only work on specially developed surfaces that are easily cleaned. This also applies to walls and floors. There should certainly be no cracks or open joints where contamination can collect. It's also necessary to have washing and changing facilities. And at the very least, there needs to be a hand basin with remotely operated taps. Even a simple coat hook does the job of storing protective clothing, which is what a lab coat is. Overlapping ones are best. But given that your laboratory meets requirements, the rest of it is down to you.
Okay, Linda, so how's your experiment going?
It's going very
Take
well.
the group that's at work here.
Troubles at first with the specific binding.
Julie's been a member of this team for 5 years, and she's recently been appointed the radiation protection supervisor for the lab.
Yes, I've got some data points.
Linda joined a couple of years later, and she's already making her mark as an outstanding bench scientist.
Yes, that sounds good.
Fred started just a couple of months ago. He's working towards his PhD. Julie has made sure the lab has clear notices on display, brief and to the point. And she certainly doesn't tolerate the misuse of radioactive tape.
Fred, not with radioactive tape. It's supposed to signify something. Use it like that, and you won't see it when it's important.
Linda's about to open a promising new line of investigation.
Hi, I've come to collect my isotopes. You should have some P33 for cancer studies.
Initially, she didn't think of using phosphorus 33. Phosphorus 32 was her first option.
Thank you.
But when she checked, she found that the maximum beta energy from P32 is much higher than from P33. The P33 was available in the chemical form she wanted, and it worked better. It was worth the extra money. Even before she'd started her work, she was obliged to fill out a work application form justifying the use of the radionuclide. And even though she'd selected the safer P33, Linda still had to use the minimum quantity needed for running the experiment effectively. Preparation for work starts with laying bench coat, absorbent side up, to soak up any inadvertent spills and splashes. Linda always works over a tray. And in this case, Linda is choosing to work behind a screen. Although the external hazard from P33 is low, the Perspex screen will protect her from accidental splashes. Another layer of absorbent paper lines the tray. Her lab coat, safety glasses and gloves provide the final layer of personal protection. But of course, a lab coat's no use unless it's fastened properly.
What are you doing?
I'm starting a new assay using P33. Oh, Fred, do your lab coat up. There's no point wearing it otherwise.
Sorry.
The manufacturer's packaging is clearly a key element in containing the isotope, and it offers Linda a shielded and stable container to work from. Before doing anything else, it's always a good idea to check that the container hasn't leaked in transit. This seems okay, but if you come across a container that you think may have leaked, inform your radiation protection officer immediately. Fred has been asked to practice his technique without using a radionuclide. He can now dispense his P32 quickly and with confidence, minimizing his radiation exposure. A record must be kept of the amount of radionuclide used. This has to be done to comply with the regulations. Fred enters this data into the laboratory records without delay. A fume cupboard is an alternative to a benchtop cabinet. If a volatile radionuclide like iodine-125 is used, it's essential to ensure containment. A volatile substance like iodine-125 also necessitates 2 pairs of gloves, as it can diffuse through them. Julie regularly monitors the outer gloves for traces of contamination. She uses tissues if there's any possibility the gloves might be contaminated. There's certainly a hint of contamination there, so the gloves must be disposed of. With volatile material like radioiodine, waste material must be kept in the fume cupboard. The inner gloves are clear, so it's a new pair of outer gloves and she can continue. If it's possible, keep waste under a weak solution of a decontaminating agent or an alkaline solution of sodium thiosulfate. Aqueous waste can then usually be disposed of in a sluice, but in strict accordance with local rules. It may even be permissible to flush low-level waste down the sink when you can get it well enough diluted. But again, check the local rules carefully. And when using a sink, be careful you don't splash all over the place. Fred's certainly getting better at following correct procedures, but being new, he's had a lot to learn. Not many weeks ago, he was working at a bench station used by everyone for dispensing their chromium-51. Fred followed the procedures correctly, which is important for safety and to avoid cross-contamination between different workers. Well, he almost followed the rules, but he forgot one important detail. It was fortunate that Julie, being radiation protection supervisor, was a lot more careful when she came to work in the area the next day. She actually decided to monitor the area before starting work. What's this? She found contamination. What had happened is Fred had taken care to monitor himself, but he hadn't monitored the work area before leaving it. That was his mistake, and in so doing, he had put other people and their work at risk. It was largely as a result of this, and a few similar incidents, that Julie decided it was time to refresh her group's knowledge of monitoring.
Now, we have 2 types of monitor available in the lab, the Mini Instruments 44B and the EP15.
The EP15 is an end window Geiger instrument. It's used to detect P32, P33 and S35. The end windows are delicate and the tube's expensive to replace. It can be used for other beta emitters, except for very weak ones.
I've marked which isotopes in the lab you can use this monitor for. Also, there's a check source to see that it's working properly. And of course, check the battery.
Some beta particles are not very penetrating, so you need to monitor carefully and methodically, keeping the probe within a centimetre of the surface. If you move the instrument too quickly or too far away from the surface, you may miss the contamination.
This is the Mini 44B. This is a scintillation detector with a beryllium window that makes it more sensitive for chromium-51. It can also be used for I-125 and a wide range of electron capture isotopes. The manufacturer's instruction manual will give you all the details. When you are monitoring, don't forget that gamma emitters can be a lot more penetrating than betas, and a strong source can be detected even a long way away. So when you are monitoring, all stock and waste must be well shielded, or you'll find it difficult, if not impossible. You need to be very methodical and careful so you don't miss anything. Of course, there's paperwork to be completed for some surveys to demonstrate that the lab's been correctly designated.
The frequency of these recorded surveys depends on the grading of the laboratory and local circumstances. Tritium has very weak beta emissions, and the easiest way to monitor for it is to take wipe tests of potentially contaminated surfaces. Linda and Fred are using folded glass fibre filter papers moistened with distilled water. Linda samples a 10 by 10 centimetre area of bench top. Although not as scientific, Fred thinks there is more chance of finding contamination with a long swipe across the bench. Occasional spots of contamination are always to be expected. As long as they're dealt with quickly, they should be no cause for concern, which is why you need to monitor regularly. Every lab should have materials for the removal of small areas of contamination readily to hand. That's that little problem dealt with. Linda now monitors the surrounding area to see if the contamination has been spread. Remember Fred and his chromium-51 incident? The way the contamination occurred there was a common one. In taking the rubber septum off, unbeknown to Fred, there was a tiny amount of the chromium-51 underneath, which flicked off. Had Fred monitored afterwards, he would easily have found the contamination. It was fortunate that Fred was working in the cabinet. A few weeks earlier, Julia had not been so fortunate. Despite her experience of working with iodine-125, somehow or other, a splash had found its way onto the floor. Fortunately, Julie was in the routine of monitoring the floor, and she spotted the contamination. It had also found its way onto the bottom of her shoe. Because she hadn't gone outside the room, the contamination was confined to a small area, so it was fairly simple to clean up. But just suppose Julie hadn't been so careful with her monitoring. Suppose she had forgotten to check the floor. But we know accidents can happen, and it's important they are dealt with correctly. The key is knowing the emergency procedures, and every site should have well worked out procedures in place.
Hello, Trevor Mosley.
Hello, Trevor. It's Julie in Cancer Research. We've had an accident here.
What's happened?
Well, Linda spilt some of her stock on herself and some on the lab floor.
The radiation protection officer finds out what radionuclide was being used and how much has been spilt.
18.5 megabecquerels. She only spilt a small bit on her leg and I've wiped off all I can, but the monitor's still screaming at me.
Is she okay?
Yeah, she's just a bit shaken up.
The first priority is to take care of the contaminated worker.
Get Linda into the shower straight away. But make sure you don't spread any contamination getting over there. So put overshoes on if you've got them, for yourself and Linda. Take a lab coat and put that in a bag. And then take another bag with you for any other contaminated items.
Okay, I'll do that.
And tell Linda not to scrub herself too much. We don't want her breaking the skin.
Right, I'll see to her now.
Okay, fine. I'll help you sort out the lab, so I'll come straight over there. But we don't want anybody going in and out of the lab. So get somebody to guard the door, please.
Many establishments will have emergency kits to help deal with the sort of spill that's happened in Linda's lab. It's a good idea to check to see if your laboratory or institution has such kits. If not, you might like to ask why not.
Are you okay in there?
Yes, I'm nearly done.
I need to check your legs then. Can I come in?
Yes.
There's only background reading. Must be in the clear.
Thank goodness for that.
If the reading hadn't shown Linda was clear, Julie would have needed to get specialist advice.
Hello, Trevor.
Hi, Julie. Are you okay?
I'm okay.
As soon as they arrive on the scene, the emergency team will want to define the extent of the contamination, to make sure no one has walked contamination down the corridor.
No one's been in or out?
No.
Thankfully, no one here has been that foolish.
The spill was over here.
Right, now, this is just background.
Because the contamination is spread over the floor, the team decide they'll put on overshoes. They start to define the extent of the contamination, but soon realize that the high background from the stock and the spill makes this very difficult.
This reading's quite high. What should I do?
Okay. I'll go and clear up the spill first, then it'll be much easier to pick up the small spots of contamination.
The team make a walkway with bench coat, absorbent side down this time, to get access to the spill without spreading the contamination.
Can you put this in the fridge behind lead, please, Julie?
Can I do something?
Yes, you start from that end. Now be careful, don't miss anything.
They work their way in from the outside, cleaning the floor before anything else. Whether it's desirable to clean up the spillage there and then depends upon circumstances and the nature of the radioisotope. Some isotopes have a relatively short half-life. Technetium-99m, for instance, has a 6-hour half-life. So in that case, it would be sensible to leave the spill for a couple of days to avoid radiation exposure during the cleanup. Linda's accident involved chromium-51 with a half-life of 28 days, so they decided to clear it up straight away. Sometimes it's not that easy to clean up the contamination.
Are you okay there?
I can't seem to shift this.
Well, in that case, Fred, let's tackle it another way.
But if it's a beta emitter like P32, for instance, you can put a sheet of Perspex over the affected area until the radiation has decayed away, because Perspex is an efficient absorber of beta radiation. In the case of P32, you'd need to leave the Perspex down for about 3 to 4 months before it was safe to remove. By knowing the emergency procedures and by staying calm and rational, a minor mishap has not become the major contamination problem it could have been.
So, are you feeling okay, Linda?
Yes, thanks.
It's nice to have you back.
It's good to be back.
So you ready for Seattle?
Yes, thanks, Fred. Just about.
But even our mock-up accident should not normally have happened. Contamination control is about being careful, being methodical, and knowing and following the local rules set out in your laboratory. Remember, it's easier to deal with radioactive contamination than other contaminants, because with the right monitor in your hands, you know where it is. Providing you do things properly, you will be doing yourself, your colleagues, and the public a big favor. So be careful and do it right.